In early 1919, a survey vessel was sent to chart the Greenland Sea, waters where ships had been vanishing without explanation. What the crew found beneath the ice wasn't a wreck. It was something that had been waiting, something that should have stayed extinct. Before we begin, please subscribe and leave a like to support the channel. Thanks. The briefing room in Copenhagen smelled of lamp oil and wet wool. Captain Holmgren stood before a wall map with a narrow pointer, his breath visible in the cold air despite the stove burning in the corner. He traced a route north through waters shaded in uncertain gray, past charted islands into regions where the cartographer's ink grew thin and speculative. I remember the cold more than anything. Not winter cold. Wrong cold. The kind that seeps through layers of wool and oilskin and settles in the bones like an ache that never quite leaves. The Greenland Sea holds a particular quality of chill. Sharp, mineral, ancient. It tastes of salt and iron when you breathe it deep. That January morning in 1919, standing in that overheated room, I didn't yet know how well I would come to understand that cold. My name is Jonas Var. I served as scientific observer aboard the steam survey vessel Aegir, tasked with documenting ice behavior and seabed anomalies in waters the Royal Danish Navy considered strategically necessary but poorly understood. The war had ended only weeks before. Ships had gone missing in those northern reaches during the conflict. Merchant vessels, naval auxiliaries, fishing trawlers. The official reports cited ice pressure, navigation errors, storms. Holmgren's tone suggested he believed otherwise. The captain was a Swede, lean and gray, with eyes like chips of Baltic flint. He had served 30 years in polar waters and carried himself with the economy of movement common to men who spend months at a time in confined spaces surrounded by hostile environment. He did not waste words. He pointed to 3 marked positions on the map where vessels had been lost between 1916 and 1918. Unusual clustering, he said. No debris recovered, no survivors. Radio silence in all cases, even from ships equipped with wireless. He tapped the pointer against the northernmost mark. The last one, HMS Resolute, went down in clear weather. Her final transmission reported unusual sonar readings and a request for navigational confirmation. Then, nothing. Dr. Mikkel Sørensen, the ship's medical officer, stood near the window with his arms crossed. He was younger than Holmgren, perhaps 40, with the kind of face that seemed perpetually skeptical. He had served on Arctic expeditions before and carried a reputation for level-headedness. Sonar equipment fails in cold water, he said. Ice distorts readings. Could have been mechanical. Could have been, Holmgren agreed. He did not sound convinced. He turned to face us fully. We sail in 2 days. Our route takes us along the eastern Greenland shelf, updating depth charts and documenting ice formation patterns. Standard survey work. But we will also investigate the last known positions of these vessels. The Admiralty wants answers. The Aegir was a converted whaler, reinforced hull, coal-fired, built low and sturdy for ramming through pack ice. She carried a crew of 14, including myself, Sørensen, and a northern hunter named Anuak, who had been hired as ice pilot. Anuak was Inuit, from a settlement near Upernavik, with the kind of weathered face that made guessing his age impossible. He spoke Danish with an accent thick as fog and rarely spoke at all unless asked directly. I met him on the dock the morning we loaded supplies. He stood apart from the crew, watching the water with an expression I couldn't read. When I introduced myself, he nodded once and said, "You go far north?" "As far as the ice allows," I said. He studied me for a long moment. "Some waters, ice does not allow. Ice decides." His tone carried no warning, no emphasis, just statement. Then he turned and walked up the gangway without another word. We departed Copenhagen on January 14th, under a sky the color of old iron. The harbor smelled of coal smoke and fish oil. Gulls followed us past the breakwater, their cries sharp and insistent, then turned back as if an invisible line had been drawn, and they would not cross. The open sea received us with rolling gray swells that hissed against the hull. For 3 days, the voyage held to routine. I spent my time in the cramped cabin I shared with Sørensen, organizing instruments and reviewing charts. The Aegir moved steadily north, her engine a constant rhythmic thrum that vibrated through the deck plates. The crew worked with the practiced efficiency of men accustomed to cold water and long silences. Holmgren kept to the bridge, monitoring radio transmissions and weather reports. The cold deepened gradually. By the 4th day, ice began to appear. Scattered fragments at first, then larger pans that scraped along the hull with sounds like grinding teeth. The sunlight grew thin and pale, more suggestion than substance. At night, the stars burned with a clarity that seemed unnatural, as if the darkness itself had been polished. Anuak stood watch on the foredeck for hours without moving, his gaze fixed on the horizon. When I asked what he looked for, he said, "Wrong shape, wrong color. Ice lies sometimes." "Ice doesn't lie," I said. "It's frozen water." He glanced at me, his expression unreadable. Everything lies when it wants to hide. We reached the first search coordinate on January 18th. The position corresponded to the last known location of a Norwegian freighter that had vanished in October 1917. Holmgren ordered the engines cut, and we drifted in relative silence while the crew deployed sonar equipment and depth charges for mapping. The water was dark green, almost black, and perfectly calm. The ice field surrounding us formed irregular patterns, broken and refrozen in ways that suggested recent movement. Sørensen and I worked on deck, lowering temperature probes and collecting water samples. The cold bit through gloves and made metal painful to touch. The sonar operator called out readings in a steady monotone. Depth consistent, no anomalies, seabed profile normal. Then his voice stopped. I looked up. He was leaning over his equipment, adjusting dials, his face tense with concentration. Holmgren appeared at his shoulder. "Report." "Contact, sir. Large object, stationary, approximately 200 meters down. Metallic signature consistent with ship wreckage." He paused, frowning. "But the shape is wrong. Too symmetrical. Too organized." Holmgren studied the sonar screen. After a long silence, he said, "Mark the position. We'll return with diving equipment if weather permits." But the weather did not permit. By evening, the wind rose and the temperature dropped 15 degrees in 2 hours. Ice began forming on the rigging faster than the crew could knock it loose. Holmgren ordered us to retreat to open water. As the Aegir turned south, I stood on deck and watched the search area recede into darkness. The water there looked different somehow, heavier, as if something beneath the surface pressed upward without breaking through. That night, I heard sounds through the hull, not the usual groaning of ice or slap of waves, something deeper, a low-frequency vibration that came in regular intervals, like a pulse. I mentioned it to Sørensen in the morning. He said I had probably heard the engine resonating through the frame. but his expression suggested he had heard it too. We pushed north again on the 20th. The ice thickened into fields that stretched unbroken to the horizon, forcing the Aegir to reduce speed and navigate through narrow leads of open water. The sky remained overcast, a uniform gray that made judging distance impossible. The sun appeared as a pale disk that never quite broke through, casting no shadows, offering no warmth. Anuak spent most of his time on the bridge with Holmgren, pointing out routes through the ice that weren't obvious from the charts. He seemed to read the frozen landscape the way other men read printed text, recognizing patterns invisible to the rest of us. When I asked how he knew which channels would hold, he said, "Ice remembers. Old ice moves different than new ice. You learn to see the memory." "Memory of what?" I asked. He looked at me with those unreadable dark eyes. "Of what came before." On the 22nd, we encountered the shelf. It appeared without warning as we rounded a promontory of packed ice, a massive formation that stretched across our intended route like a wall. The surface was unnaturally smooth, almost polished, reflecting the dim light with an opalescent sheen. It rose perhaps 15 feet above the waterline and extended east and west beyond visibility. Holmgren ordered engines full stop. The Aegir drifted to within 50 meters of the formation, close enough that I could see detail through binoculars. The ice showed none of the usual fracture patterns or pressure ridges. No snow accumulation, no weathering. It looked fresh, as if it had frozen overnight. But the color was wrong. Too clear, too blue, with a depth that suggested the ice extended far below the surface. Sørensen stood beside me at the rail. "I've never seen ice form like that," he said quietly. "It's too uniform, too stable. This far north, pack ice breaks and shifts constantly. But look at it. No movement, no cracks. It's like a single piece." I trained the binoculars on the waterline where the shelf met the sea. The boundary was perfectly straight, a horizontal line without variation. Beneath the surface, the ice continued downward in a sheer face that disappeared into darkness. Something about the color down there troubled me. Not quite blue, not quite green, a shade I couldn't name. "We need to examine it," I said. Holmgren agreed. He ordered a boat lowered with a 4-man crew, myself, Sørensen, 2 sailors named Peterson and Halvorsen. We rowed across the gap between ship and shelf, our oars making sounds that echoed strangely in the still air. The cold intensified as we approached, a penetrating chill that made breathing painful. We secured the boat to an ice formation at the base of the shelf and climbed onto the surface. The ice held our weight easily, though it felt wrong underfoot. Too slick, too hard, more like glass than frozen water. I knelt and examined it closely. The structures showed no crystalline pattern, no bubbles, no impurities. Pure ice extending down to depths I couldn't measure. Sørensen chipped away a sample with a hammer and chisel. The ice fractured reluctantly, requiring multiple strikes. When a piece finally broke free, it was so cold it burned to touch, even through gloves. He wrapped it carefully and placed it in an insulated container. Peterson called out from 20 meters ahead. We followed his voice and found him standing at the edge of a gap in the shelf. A narrow crevasse, perhaps a meter wide, that split the surface in a clean line. He was staring down into it, his face pale. "Sir," he said to Sørensen, "you should see this." We looked. The crevasse descended vertically through the ice shelf, 30 meters at least, possibly more. At the bottom, visible through the translucent walls, something dark rested against the ice. Not rock, not sediment. Something with structure, with shape. I lay flat and peered down, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The light filtering through the ice walls gave everything a blue cast that distorted proportion and distance. But the object below had definition. Curves, angles, something that suggested deliberate form rather than natural occurrence. Could be wreckage, Halverson said, from one of the missing ships. Sørensen shook his head slowly. Too deep. And look at the ice around it. No disruption, no cracks. If something crashed through or sank here, the ice would show trauma. He gestured at the pristine walls. This formed around it. Or it's been here long enough that the ice grew over it. We spent 2 hours on the shelf, taking measurements and photographs. The formation extended at least 3 kilometers in both directions before disappearing into ice fog. The depth varied. In some places, the shelf rose to 20 feet above waterline. In others, it sat barely exposed. But everywhere, the same unnatural smoothness, the same crystalline clarity. Anuak refused to leave the Aegir. When Holmgren asked why, he said, "Bad ice, old ice, ice that should not be walked on." "It's perfectly stable," Holmgren replied. "Stable is not the same as safe." By the time we returned to the ship, the temperature had dropped another 10 degrees. Ice began forming on the boat during the row back, accumulating so fast we had to chip it from the oars between strokes. The Aegir's hull wore a rime of frost that made her look ancient, encased in time. That evening, I examined the ice sample under the microscope in my cabin. The structure defied explanation. No hexagonal crystals, no obvious formation pattern. Under magnification, it looked almost organic, fibrous, layered, as if it had grown rather than frozen. When I mentioned this to Sørensen, he suggested contamination from algae or mineral deposits. But his tone lacked conviction. The sounds through the hull returned that night, stronger than before. I lay in my bunk and felt them as much as heard them. Rhythmic vibrations that resonated through the frame with unsettling regularity. Too regular for ice, too deep for engine noise. A pulse, steady and slow, originating from somewhere below us. I found Sørensen in the galley, unable to sleep. He was drinking coffee, staring at nothing. "You hear it?" I asked. He nodded. "Everyone hears it. The crew thinks it's the ship settling against the ice. Holmgren says it's thermal expansion creating pressure waves." He paused, but I measured the intervals. 27 seconds between pulses, exact, down to the fraction of a second. Nature doesn't work in perfect intervals. We sat in silence, feeling the deck tremble beneath us with metronomic precision. After a long while, Sørensen said, "There's something else. The water temperature readings from this afternoon, they're wrong." "Well, wrong how?" "Too warm, 3 degrees above what it should be at this latitude and depth. Localized around the shelf, as if something is generating heat." I looked at him. "Ice doesn't generate heat." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." Holmgren called a meeting at dawn. The entire crew gathered in the mess, cramped and restless. The captain stood at the head of the table with charts spread before him, his expression harder than usual. "We're changing course," he announced, "moving east along the shelf to find a passage point. The Admiralty wants documentation of the formation's extent and composition. We proceed with caution, but we proceed." One of the older sailors, a Norwegian named Kristoffersen, spoke up. "Sir, with respect, the ice doesn't feel right. Too quiet, no shifting, no cracking, In 40 years on these waters, I've never seen pack ice that doesn't move." "Your concern is noted," Holmgren said flatly. "But our orders are clear. We have instruments, trained observers, and a reinforced hull. We will exercise proper precaution." Anuak stood near the back of the room. He hadn't said anything, but now Holmgren turned to him. "You have experience with ice formations in these waters. Your assessment?" The hunter was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried weight. "My people have stories about water that freezes when it should not, ice that appears where none should be. They say it marks places where something sleeps, something old." He paused. "The stories say, 'Do not disturb sleeping things.'" "Folklore," someone muttered. Anuak's gaze swept the room. "Folklore exists because people survived to tell it, people who listened." Holmgren's jaw tightened. "We're not here to catalog ghost stories. We're here to map and document." Dismissed. The crew filed out slowly, exchanging looks. I stayed behind with Sørensen. The captain remained bent over his charts, making notations with mechanical precision. After a moment, without looking up, he said, "You think I'm making a mistake?" I said carefully, "that we've encountered something unexpected, something we don't understand, and that proceeding without more information might be unwise." "The war took 4 years and 20 million lives," Holmgren said quietly. "And now shipping routes that used to be safe are graveyards. If there's a navigational hazard here, an anomaly that explains those losses, we need to identify it, chart it, make it known. That's not recklessness. That's responsibility." He looked up then, and I saw something in his face I hadn't seen before. Not stubbornness, fear. The kind of fear that demands action rather than retreat. "We've lost too many ships to unknown causes," he continued. "Too many men gone without explanation. If something in these waters is responsible, I intend to find out what." We sailed east along the shelf for 2 days. The formation remained constant, smooth, towering, unbroken, except for occasional crevasses like the one we'd seen. The Aegir stayed in the open water channel between the shelf and the northern pack ice, maintaining a distance of roughly 100 meters from the face. The temperature readings remained anomalous, 3 to 4 degrees above normal, concentrated near the shelf, dropping to expected levels at distance. I documented everything: water samples, atmospheric measurements, ice density calculations. None of it made sense. Heat sources in Arctic waters meant volcanic activity or geothermal vents. But sonar showed no such features, just that dark shape beneath the ice, following us. I noticed it on the morning of the 25th. The sonar operator reported a contact directly below the shelf, matching our course and speed. At first, we assumed it was a sonar artifact, a reflection or echo distortion caused by the ice. But the signature remained consistent, large, solid, moving parallel to our position. "Could be a submarine," Peterson suggested, "left over from the war." "No engine signature," the operator replied. "No propeller wash, no sound at all except..." He frowned at his equipment. "Except that pulse. The same pulse we've been hearing. It's coming from the contact." Holmgren stood rigid behind him, staring at the screen. The green trace showed our vessel as a bright point, the shelf as a continuous wall, and beneath it, a shape, elongated, curved, impossibly large. "How deep?" Holmgren asked. "Reading shows it's directly under the shelf. Hard to measure depth when it's embedded in ice. But the displacement suggests significant mass." Sørensen joined us on the bridge. He looked at the sonar screen for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was careful. That shape, those proportions. It's not a ship. Then what is it? Holmgren demanded. Sørensen pointed to a specific curve on the trace. That's a rib structure. And there, that's vertebral spacing. Whatever is under that ice, Captain, it has a skeleton. The shelf began to change on the 26th. Not suddenly, not dramatically. Just small signs that accumulated into something undeniable. Cracks appeared in the surface where none had existed the day before. Thin hairline fractures that spread in patterns too regular to be natural. The water near the face grew warmer, 5 degrees above ambient, 6, then 7. Steam rose from the channel between us and the ice, visible in the frigid air as pale ribbons that twisted and dispersed. The pulse intensified. No longer something felt through the hull, but something heard. A deep rhythmic thrum that resonated in the chest and made the rigging hum. 27 seconds between beats, unchanging, relentless as a heartbeat. The crew moved through their duties with mounting tension, speaking in low voices, glancing toward the shelf with increasing frequency. Holmgren ordered us to maintain course. He wanted documentation, measurements, proof that could be presented to the Admiralty. But his confidence had fractured. I saw it in the way he gripped the bridge rail, knuckles white, jaw clenched. He knew something was wrong. We all did. The question was whether to acknowledge it or continue pretending normalcy held. Anuak no longer pretended. He stood on the foredeck for hours, watching the ice with an expression of profound unease. When I joined him there, he said without preamble, "It knows we are here." "What knows?" I asked. He gestured toward the shelf. "What sleeps? What is waking?" "You're saying something alive is under that ice?" "Yes. Something that's been there how long? Months? Years?" He turned to look at me, and I saw something ancient in his eyes. Longer, much longer, since before ice, since warm water covered everything. He paused. My grandfather's grandfather told stories about creatures that ruled the seas before men existed, before ice came. Most died when the world froze. But some, he gestured again, some found places to sleep, to wait, until the ice broke and the water warmed again. "That's impossible," I said. "Nothing could survive frozen for thousands of years." "Then explain what moves beneath us," Anuak replied. "Explain the heat, the pulse. Explain why the ice cracks from below." I had no answer. We stood in silence, watching steam rise from water that should have been frozen solid. The collapse began at dusk. A section of shelf 300 meters ahead simply gave way, breaking apart with sounds like cannon fire. Massive blocks of ice tilted and slid into the water, creating waves that rocked the Aegir violently. Holmgren ordered engines full reverse, but the channel was narrow and turning radius limited. More sections collapsed in sequence, each failure triggering the next, as if pressure from below pushed upward with increasing force. The smooth surface we documented shattered into chaos, ice blocks the size of houses tumbling and grinding against each other. The water churned white with displaced air and pulverized ice. Through it all, the pulse continued. Stronger now, faster. No longer 27 seconds, but 20, then 18, accelerating like something fighting toward consciousness. "Get us out of here," someone shouted. Holmgren's voice cut through the chaos. "Steady, all hands to stations. Prepare for contact." The Aegir reversed through the channel, engines straining. But the collapsing shelf created debris that blocked our path. A massive ice block drifted into our stern, grinding against the hull with sounds that set teeth on edge. The deck tilted. Men grabbed rigging, rails, anything fixed. I held the bridge door frame and watched the shelf disintegrate. Then I saw it. Beneath the collapsing ice, something moved. Something vast. A shape that rose from darkness into the light, filtering through fractured ice. Pale, curved, immense. A section of rib cage longer than the Aegir, arcing upward. Then another. The skeletal structure we'd seen on sonar, but not buried, not dead. Moving with deliberate power, shedding ice that had encased it, freeing itself from a prison that had held for epochs. "Oh God," Sørensen whispered beside me. "Oh dear God." The creature, because it was undeniably a creature, continued to rise. More of its body became visible as ice broke away. The spine was massive, vertebrae the size of steam boilers, supporting ribs that could have sheltered houses. The bones were not white, but a deep gray blue, almost black, with a surface that looked more like stone than calcium. Along the spine, tissue remained. Not decomposed, not frozen. Living tissue that moved and flexed as the creature shifted its weight. A head emerged from the deepest ice. Triangular, flattened dorsally. A jaw that opened to reveal teeth, serrated triangles, each one longer than a man, arranged in rows that receded into the throat. The eyes were absent, just hollow sockets that had long since lost whatever organs once filled them. But the creature didn't need eyes. It had other senses. I could feel them focusing on us, assessing, recognizing prey. "It's a shark," I heard myself say. "A prehistoric shark, Carcharical's Megalodon. But it can't be. They've been extinct for millions of years." "That's not extinct," Sørensen said, his voice shaking. "That's very much alive." The creature completed its ascent, breaking through the remaining ice shelf with casual, terrible power. Water cascaded from its flanks, revealing a body easily 20 meters long, possibly more. The tail was asymmetric, the upper lobe elongated for sustained swimming in cold water. Muscles moved beneath skin that looked like armor plate, mottled gray and black, covered in scars that spoke of unimaginable age. It hung in the water beside the Aegir, so close I could see individual teeth, could count the gill slits along its throat, 7 on each side. The mouth opened and closed rhythmically, processing water, tasting the sea, learning what had disturbed its rest. Holmgren found his voice. "All stop. Engines off. No movement, no sound." The order passed in whispers. The Aegir's engine cut, leaving only the sounds of ice breaking, water churning, and that relentless pulse, now recognizable as the creature's heartbeat, amplified through water and hull, a rhythm that had persisted through millennia of frozen sleep. The creature circled, not quickly, with the slow deliberation of something that had never known predators, that had ruled absolutely and remembered that dominion. It passed beneath us, close enough that I felt the water displaced by its passage push against the hull. The shadow it cast turned the sea black. A section of ice drifted too close to its head. The jaws opened, smooth, controlled, and closed on the block. Teeth designed to shear through bone-crushed ice with sounds like breaking glass. The creature didn't eat the ice, just tested its strength against resistance, learning what its body could still do after endless sleep. Then it submerged. The massive tail drove downward, propelling the creature into depths that swallowed it completely. The turbulence rocked the Aegir hard enough to send unsecured objects sliding across decks. Men shouted, grabbing for handholds. The ship tilted 30 degrees, recovered, tilted again. When the water settled, The creature was gone, but the pulse remained, fainter now, receding northward under the ice fields, accompanied by a pressure wave that traveled through the sea, like the footsteps of something too large to comprehend, walking away from an encounter that hadn't interested it enough to pursue. Holmgren stood frozen at the bridge rail, staring at the space where the creature had been. His face had gone gray. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. Set course. South. Maximum speed. No one argued. The Aegir's engine roared to life, pushing the vessel through debris-choked water, fleeing toward open sea while the northern ice fields groaned and shifted with the passage of something that shouldn't exist moving beneath them. We made poor progress. The channel had collapsed in multiple places, forcing detours through narrow leads that threatened to close behind us. It took 6 hours to clear the shelf's reach, 6 hours of grinding through ice with the crew silent and watchful, scanning the water for any sign of return. The creature didn't follow. It had more important concerns. Behind us, the ice fields cracked and separated, creating leads where none should exist, opening pathways toward deeper water, toward hunting grounds that hadn't known such an apex predator since the Pliocene. Sørensen and I worked through the night, documenting everything: measurements, photographs, water temperature data. The evidence was irrefutable. Something had survived, preserved in ice cold enough to slow metabolism to near stasis, waiting for conditions that would allow it to wake. Climate change, Sørensen said quietly. The ice is melting, retreating, water temperatures rising even here. It's been trapped for millions of years. But now, he gestured helplessly. Now it's free. Will it survive? I asked. Can something that ancient adapt to modern oceans? He looked at me with haunted eyes. Jonas, that thing survived the ice ages. Multiple extinction events, the complete transformation of planetary climate. It's the most successful predator in Earth's history. I think the question isn't whether it will survive. He paused. The question is whether anything else in those waters will. We reached open sea on January 28th. The Aegir turned south toward civilization, toward warmth, toward seas that felt comprehensible. Behind us, the ice fields continued to crack and shift, releasing ancient things into a world that had forgotten they existed. Holmgren spent the voyage composing his report. He wrote with mechanical precision, documenting everything, attaching measurements and photographs, building an irrefutable case. When we docked in Bergen, he submitted the report to the Admiralty, along with orders that it be forwarded to relevant scientific institutions. The response came 3 weeks later. The report had been reviewed, the evidence examined, the conclusions considered, and then quietly archived, filed under ice anomalies and extreme weather phenomena. No follow-up investigation ordered, no public disclosure authorized. Just a brief note thanking us for our thorough documentation of unusual ice instability in northern waters. They didn't want to know. Or they knew and chose silence over panic. Either way, the message was clear. The report would stay buried, the truth left unspoken, the creature allowed to vanish into classified shadows. But sailors talk. Fishermen share stories. Within months, reports began filtering back from the Greenland Sea. Ships encountering massive shapes moving beneath them in waters that should have been empty. Whale pods fleeing south in panic. Unexplained disappearances that matched the pattern from 1916 to 1918. The creature was hunting again, learning its new world, adapting to waters both familiar and changed. And we had no way to stop it, no means to track it, no weapons that could threaten something that had survived the death of worlds. I left maritime service after the Aegir voyage. Took a position at the university in Oslo, teaching and researching from the safety of land. But I still follow reports from northern waters, still track ship losses and whale migrations and unexplained sonar contacts. The creature is still there, still hunting, still growing stronger as the ice continues its retreat, opening new territories that have been frozen for millennia. And sometimes, late at night, I feel that pulse again. Not through ship hull, but through memory, resonating in my chest like a second heartbeat. 27 seconds, steady, eternal. The rhythm of something that refused to die, that waited with patience beyond human comprehension for the ice to break and the hunt to resume. We found it sleeping. We watched it wake. And now it remembers what it was. God help whatever swims in those waters now.